Hey guys, it's Em. And today we're going to be making a video I've had on my mind for a long time. After making the JoJo-verse video and thinking back on all the creative and over-the-top powers, I felt I read another manga that, while not exactly the same, had about the same amount of bullshit happening. Then it came to me. It was a manga I read damn near religiously in middle school. MedakaVerse. Never imagined that the thing to pull me back into talking about this manga would be a versus video, but here we are. To very quickly summarize MedakaVerse for a majority of those seeing this, it was a light ecchi slice of life turned battle manga about a class president that gets involved in all sorts of violent situations. To the point where it's very easy to forget that's what the core premise of it was. Wasn't necessarily anything super special in the sea of shonen battle mangas, but to say it hasn't managed to have some sort of impression on me, especially with a few of its characters and abilities, which I'll get to later, I would be lying. As a quick tidbit, I'm not going to explain super in-depth all of Kenshiro's abilities. I'm going to be speaking as if you somewhat know what he's capable of, as since this is an HNK channel. For the more extreme powers I bring up multiple times like MT or Soryu, I'll have a very short and simple description of what they do in the description of this video. Admittedly, it's going to be pretty funny to have to edit some of the most testosterone-filled characters in all of fiction, next to some of the squishiest, but with all that out of the way, let's get into the versus debates. Unlike my JoJo-verse video, we won't strictly be going in order of character appearances. I've separated them by miscellaneous heroes and main villains in that order, and you'll see why towards the end. So to start, we have Atome. I guarantee you every MedakaVerse fan knows this character's design, but nobody knew her name. In short, her ability is that she has the consistency of liquid. In the one and only fight she's in, she's hit by one of the at the time heavy hitters, and the punch goes straight through her. The only thing that managed to hit her was one of the characters who could warp reality. We really don't have much to go off of with her. For reference to my HNK fans, this character was shorter lived than Huey in the manga. We're gonna highball her for the sake of argument and say she can't get tired from making hits go through her, or be rushed to the point the ability is negated. But from what we've seen, no physical attack would work on her. Ken most likely wouldn't be able to hit or slash her because they would all, as I've said, go through her. But at the same time, she doesn't seem to possess any outstanding strength feats, so she wouldn't be able to hurt Ken at all. While we didn't see her throw any punches, she didn't appear to be the damage dealer of the group. So funnily enough, unless Ken uses Soryu, I think this would just end in an awkward tie with Ken being unable to hit her, and her being unable to do any sort of damage to her. Fude is an interesting filler-only character that I think was way too interesting to be confined to just one special. Fude's ability was that if you painted over a part of your body, it would hurt you. While another short-lived character like Atome, it's pretty clear what his ability does. Depending on the paint color he uses, he'd have different effects on the body. Pink makes you unable to intimidate him, blue makes your body bruised and injured as long as that part of your body is exposed without clothing, gray can make objects fall apart, and while we didn't see red, it can be assumed that red would just make you bleed. I know when many people do debates like this, they imagine a flat room where two big burly men just hit each other. But for him and a few other characters we're going to talk about, their powers just don't work that way. If we argue Ken knows what his power does and immediately bum rushes him, yeah, he gets ragdolled in like a few seconds. But in a more fair scenario where Ken's set up, the answer is a little bit more interesting to explain. Let's say Fude and Ken know they're about to fight. Fude's hiding in the school or some other building while Ken's looking for him. It's implied Fude needs line of sight to hurt someone, so he'd probably be looking out of a window and begin painting bruises on Ken's body. It would then be up to Ken to find where he is before he eventually collapses from his wounds. You could argue Fude could just round start slice his neck, but from the bit of character we did see, he's arrogant and didn't even try to use that ability until he felt it was absolutely necessary, so I doubt he'd off-jump do that. Given there's no indication where the attacks are coming from, and Fude isn't physically strong or anything to emit some sort of strength aura, I think it could most likely go to him, as Ken wouldn't really have any way of tracking him. It's more of a situation of who you'd want to win. He has literally no durability feats, so Ken could probably flick him unconscious if he gets his hands on him. But it lies heavily on if he finds him. The only reason this character even lost in the show was because he was in an open field and against a reality warper who deleted color from the world so his power wouldn't work. Ninami is a swordswoman. Her ability is pretty simple to explain as she can cut things with her sword. Where it becomes a MedakaVerse ability is the range and effectiveness of it. She's cut through a helicopter and through a warship with one swing and little difficulty. Though the range on how far she can cut is debatable, it seems she can't swing it at superhuman speeds or anything. When a situation like that comes, she pulls out more swords and then stabs them into her arms. She doesn't seem to have the same sort of damage capabilities as she did with her one sword, as she ended up cutting someone multiple times and not putting them down. But it does increase her speed to the point where she was able to keep up with one of the faster characters in a transformed state. To move on to durability, she seems pretty tanky. As a late manga hard hitter sucker punches her in the back while she wasn't looking, with enough force that they say out loud the punch should have completely gone through her. But she gets up, although a bit stunned. If she was to fight Ken, to be honest, I don't think it would end well for her. I imagine she could have the capabilities to hurt Ken if she could land a hit with her main blade, but seeing as she swings it at the speed of a normal person, there's no way she'd land a hit with this on Ken. Her six sword style is cute and does make her faster, but not fast enough to land hits on Ken on an average basis. And the swings she might be able to luckily nick on him would hardly do anything to him at all, as her faster style with these swords don't seem to do anywhere near the damage something like Nanto would. Her durability feat against Torai is cute, but Ken hits as hard as her, if not harder, and also has the speed to straight up swamp her with punches of that same caliber that stunned her. This fight would definitely end the moment Ken gets anywhere remotely close to her. On to Megasuno. To put this bluntly, she would most likely stomp base Ken. Her ability is her imagination. Whatever she imagines has physical properties, and the only way to defeat her is through imagining something able to defeat her creature. As if either of them are attacked in any other sort of way, it doesn't seem to have any effect on them. Someone pulled out 2 machine guns on her and her imaginary creature tanked them. She was hit with a sonic scream and then she made up a reason why it wouldn't affect her creature at all. The only reason she even loses her fight in the manga is because she fights a schizophrenic person. And this isn't me throwing an edgy joke in the video. That is literally what happens. Moving on to Ken, he's not exactly known for his whimsical creative mind. I don't see any way he gets past whatever creature she imagines to fight him. He can't just speed blitz or blast her because it seems the imaginary creatures have their broken capabilities before she even verbalizes them. They'd most likely block for her and tank whatever he does anyway. In Muso Tensei, it might be a different story. Seeing as her creatures have physical properties, there's a good chance he could go through the monster and then incapacitate her. Because like Fude, this character also has no physical durability feats. You can't argue for her that she can make her creature ghost immune, so he can't just do that, but that's heavily stretching for her favor. So who wins really comes down to how you want to imagine MT would work against her. Chicago, like many of the other miscellaneous characters, has more of a technical ability. She controls oxygen, not just to breathe, but she can also oxidize someone to the point they start deteriorating. If you've seen JoJo, it's very similar to how Pucci started dying against Emporio. This one isn't super complicated to explain, to be honest. She's a bit of a coward. In a raw environment where her and Ken meet, she'd probably give up immediately, as the moment she saw Kumagawa, she noticed she was far under him without even seeing what his capabilities were. But if she's forced to fight and does oxidize Ken most likely defeats her before it can take him out. Unlike Fude's ability, which has a lot of range, Chicago seems like she needs to be in close proximity to the person. Close enough where Ken could immediately shut her down in seconds. So while she does technically have the ability to kill Ken, she doesn't have anything to back it, so she'd most likely get ragdolled. Kamone has another fun but simple ability. In short, he has foresight into attacks. Unlike other characters like this though, it's not like he dodges through reflex or something similar. He stops attacks before they even start. In his fight against Senkichi, he stopped the kicking assault he was about to do before it even started by stomping on his foot. In a mostly off-screen fight he has with Medaka, he manages to defeat her completely unscathed. The two characters he beat aren't slouches in speed or strength, and given he could fight Medaka in a pretty late manga variant of her at that, I don't think it's hard to imagine he could use his ability to trump Ken's movement and counter immediately. In short, I think in base Ken would most likely lose. But against MT, there isn't really anything he could do. Given he can't physically touch Ken, he'd be unable to use his ability and probably get pummeled in an instant. Najemi is one of the top 3 strongest characters in this story. I'm sure most Medaka Box fans were probably rubbing their little hands together waiting for me to bring her up. To put it bluntly, ain't no way Ken's doing anything against this character at all. This character is more adjacent to a god, and we don't even know her full limits. She's been alive since the Big Bang and casually pointed to a star in a conversation and caused it to explode. It's hard to even debate what Ken would do here. You can argue she doesn't know what he's gonna do, but she's shown knowledge of other Jump magazines and animes. She might have even directly referenced HNK before, so she most likely would know who he is and everything he does. She also has more than 6 million abilities, and we've never seen her fight serious. Even Soryu most likely wouldn't work on her, because of how she's had pretty much every reality warping ability in this series at one point or another, and could counter it. On top of all of that, if she's feeling quirky, she can send you back in time to deal with her prime self, who is even stronger somehow. So yeah, no, there isn't a single way Ken even scratches her. On to the main characters, we start with Akune. Not gonna lie, the first 2 only get into this video because they're part of the main cast. Akune is a very strong judo guy. That's a majority of what he can do. He can also copy abilities, but to a far weaker extent. I wish there was more I could mention about this, but past the Flash Plan arc, it feels like the writer even forgot about him. Ken would ragdoll him in seconds and there isn't much he could do about it. Not much else I could expand upon. Kikijima is kind of the same thing. She has a voice cannon attack. She shouts hard enough for it to cause damage. Not enough damage to hurt Ken, and no durability. She'd get dealt with within a second or so. Shiranui is kind of interesting to discuss. She's one of the few characters Hajime was somewhat afraid of because of her ability. Real Eater. It, in short, can get rid and alter your abilities. But that's if she can touch you. This thing has practically no range. If she can't touch you, she can't use it. Which is the reason she lost the only story fight she was in. Ken has so many moves to range out people, she'd have no way of using it. So he'd most likely stun her and just leave a lollipop for her as he walks away. Zenkichi is our second protagonist who takes over for a majority of the second half of the manga. Zenkichi is a competent fighter, he's shown good strength and speed, but he's also never beat any of the main villains. He's more of the emotional handbag of the plot, if anything, because the characters he's defeated on his own surrendered when he gave them a friendship speech. His most impressive feats are fighting an injured Nanami for a few seconds with discount Nanto, and fighting an early manga Medaka pretty much evenly, while she was in a straitjacket. To which the second she ripped her arms free, she immediately started dogging. I'm saying all this to get to the fact Ken would just beat him. Unlike everyone else, he doesn't have some super goofy JoJo type ability to fall back on, and his strength and speed feats aren't impressive in the HNK verse. Someone like Jaggy could probably take him, honestly. Medaka is a very different story though. It'd be easier for me to describe what Medaka can't do instead of what she can. She has so many strength and speed feats, I don't think she'd be far under Kenshiro. For speed feats, let me show a few examples, most of which come from extremely early in the manga. She used after images, managed to water down explosives, kick over a desk, and save her friends by stuffing them in the lockers from her office, all within half of a second. Broken the sound barrier and moved so fast she destroyed an entire hallway before a man with automatic reflexes could process she even moved. She's ripped an entire academy-sized building down around her while injured and tied to it in the first 10 chapters. And somehow, she also blew up a chunk of the moon off screen. So yeah, I think she could throw hands with Ken. She also has multiple forms, most of which useless in this discussion or just power-ups. So we can focus on her final form, in God mode. Very edgy, but it is what it is. Which let her make an after image, do the sonic boom attack, and turn around while moving at that speed, alongside taking no damage while doing so. Other than the basic shonen hit hard and move fast capabilities, she's also gained the abilities of practically everyone she's fought in the series. Sound familiar? I say practically because she's only been shown to replicate mostly physical attacks and moves, as she's never taken or at least used any reality warping abilities on her own. And also, like many other anime protags, she gets stronger as she fights, adjusting to the opponent she's against. Even if she was somehow slightly under Ken physically, she'd catch up to him within a matter of seconds due to how many physical attacks he has. Hitting her pressure points wouldn't work because she stole a medical move from a character early on that lets her recover from any injury and even the brink of death. The only way these two wouldn't end up slugging it out is if Ken immediately killed her, which A, in character Ken wouldn't do that, and B, he might not be able to immediately kill her even if he snuck up on her and blitzed her. So in short, what I'm saying is, base Ken honestly might end up lagging behind Medaka by a good margin, especially if she's in end god mode. He doesn't have a way to answer to quite a bit of the abilities she's picked up over the show's runtime. And durability wise, she could go pound to pound with him, as she's also let herself be hit just to figure out how certain people's attacks work. So she isn't a slouch in durability. The problem for her comes in MT. Like most versus H&K arguments go, when you throw MT in it, she functionally can't do anything. As I said earlier, she's never shown the capability to do any reality warping attacks in the series, so she doesn't have a way to hit Ken at that point. So in base, Medaka 80% of the time would take it. In MT, Ken takes it. In Soryu, it's debatable. Unlike something like JoJo, Medaka legitimately knows how to fight without her powers. It'd be a scuffle, it's leaning more towards Ken, but I could also see her squeezing out a victory here. On to the villains. Once I start discussing them, you'll see why I left them for last, as they ramp up quite fast ability-wise. Starting with Unzen, who is the first major villain, no, I don't think so. His main ability is exploding marbles and bounding string. String so strong that the only reason Medaka broke free from it was, like I said, she brought the entire building down. Ken so fast where he could catch the marbles and then just throw them back. And similar to Medaka, I don't doubt Ken would just break whatever Unzen ties him to. You can argue that his jacket would block pressure points as it was made from a special fiber, but against early Medaka, it said he could only take 3 or so hits from her. If Ken decided to rush this little fella, it's curtain swarm. Chigusa is kind of fun to talk about because he has a more tropey, especially nowadays, kind of power. When I mentioned the guy who fought with automatic reflexes earlier, this is who I was talking about. The easiest way to explain it is it's like UI. He's able to move without thinking and automatically dodge attacks. In a vacuum, he seems really powerful, though he does have 2 major problems. One, in early Medaka in base form was tanking hits from him to figure out how his power worked. If she could take so many hits from him at that point of the story, Ken would shrug them off easily. Second, the way he got hit in the story says a lot of how I think this fight would go. So when he fought Medaka, he lost because after being hit with one sonic boom attack, he says the main reason he couldn't counter it is because it was faster than the blink of an eye. Now if you remember Han, I feel like my viewers are probably tired of me saying this, but Han hit so fast it didn't leave a shadow. And Ken was able to keep up with it, meaning Ken would be able to hit Chigusa pretty reliably. Second, he can't continue dodging at the same level once he's injured. After being hit with Medaka's attack, which I guess I should just name drop as the Kurokami Phantom, he couldn't maintain his auto dodge ability, meaning Ken could hit him with one strong punch and then deal with him like he's any sort of Muka the Weak. Koga is another fairly simple villain of the weak to explain. She's a remodeled human, a cyborg. She has superhuman strength and agility, alongside extremely fast regeneration, as she managed to repair a broken leg within 10 seconds. The problem being, she doesn't have anything comparable to Ken at all. Her strength isn't super impressive in the HNK-verse, neither is her durability. Granted, we've never seen her fully lose, as in her main fight she gets pinned by Akune, the character who I said was no threat earlier and surrenders. While she'd most likely be immune to things like pressure points, and we've never seen her get knocked out, she has no way of dealing with Ken. And while I don't think in a fist fight he'd be able to straight put her down, as she'd probably recover soon after a fist rush or something, Nanto or Gento would definitely be able to incapacitate her. Naze is Medaka's sister, and basically a more advanced Koga. By the end of the series, she's also a cyborg, and we can assume she has similar regeneration, despite it never being shown in fights. The main thing that differentiates these two is Naze's more of a strategist when compared to Koga, who seem like more of the brute of the group. Her brute strength doesn't seem as high, so she instead uses fire and ice abilities. She's able to freeze an entire room within seconds or incinerate someone with a direct blast of fire. She can also make fire and ice swords. As for durability, she can cover her entire body in ice. An ice that can cover her so fast, it can cover any wound on her body within moments. For the versus aspect, if she was to go against Ken, a majority of his techniques most likely wouldn't work against her. Pressure points in Nanto would be negated by her armor, and to my knowledge, the only thing that stated could break it was Nanami's slice. However, similar to the other more technical characters, I doubt she'd have enough force to really damage Ken. As I'm sure HNK fans have seen, Brawl was grabbed by a martial artist pyromancer and was barely affected. And since the person Naze incinerated had basic human durability, I don't have any reason to believe she'd be strong enough to burn Ken. She's also never been shown to freeze the individuals she's fighting, just herself in the room, so that kind of tactic wouldn't work either. While I think she may eventually be able to come up with some sort of way to injure Ken due to her intellect, it'd probably be too late, as I feel Ken has the raw attack power to burst through her armor after a long enough period of time, or just tire her out. And I know someone may mention her ability numbing syringes. A, I don't think she'd be able to hit someone as fast as Ken with those, and B, we've seen them not work on people if they don't have her type of ability. So to say it would work on Ken would be kind of a stretch. Odo was the leader of the Flash Planet, another technical character we never got to see fight much. Though studying for this video, he could do a lot more than I thought he could. To simplify his ability, he can control electricity. This of course means he can mess with machinery, but it doesn't mean just hacking. He can physically move objects as if he had telepathy with this ability. And also it has this little teeny tiny effect that allows him to hack into people's motor brain functions and move them like they're puppets. The most well-known example is when he forces people to bow to him by using their minds against them. But he can also make you move subconsciously, as he made Zenkichi choke Kikijima without him even noticing his arm moves. He can also steal abilities, although this isn't like Medaka or Ken's ability to do this. He has to physically reach into the person to be able to do it. On top of this, he also has the ability to brainwash people if he can touch them, using his electricity to remove all of their memory. All this together leads to him being a way better combatant than I thought he would be. And to put this into perspective, Medaka gained this ability as well, which is another part of the reason I don't know how well Ken would do against her. But anyways, back onto Odo versus Ken. Honestly, it's looking pretty grim for base Ken. Odo has no durability feats, but I don't see any way Ken resists his mind control. The only characters who managed to do that in the show were Zenkichi, and that was only because Odo was distracted, and Medaka, which like I said, stole the ability from him. Unless Ken gains the ability to make himself go brain dead and still fight, he wouldn't be able to resist Odo controlling his body. And while Odo has no ways on his own to kill or incapacitate Ken, he could just make Ken hit himself until he's unconscious. Although against MT, he'd probably get ragdolled. But the problem is, Ken never just opens with MT, and I doubt seeing this scrawny guy would prompt him to use it. With the others I mentioned MT with, he'd most likely have enough time to go into it once he realizes he needs it against them. Even with Medaka, although she has this ability, she's only used it once or twice of her own free will, as it kinda goes against her character. But Odo would most likely immediately or near immediately go for this, since unlike Medaka, he doesn't have a ton of fighting capability besides it, so Ken realistically wouldn't even get the chance to go into MT. So I think Ken would probably lose this one. Umuke is another fairly simple one. She can manipulate vines and things, making trees and tree people that can be tall enough to grow through the ceiling of a greenhouse. While I think they'd be able to stall Ken for a bit, these wouldn't stop him. But this isn't her main ability. Her main ability is to rot whatever she touches with her hands, from flesh to concrete to even the air. While it's quite strong, Ken would be able to pretty much bypass most of her abilities using Nanto. If she used the trees to distract them, he could just cut through them in seconds. If she tried to sneak attack him within the plants, Ken's seen through attacks with his eyes slashed. I doubt he'd struggle much trying to sense where she's coming from. I don't see her getting in to touch him, so while she does have the ability to kill base Ken, he'd probably be able to incapacitate her before it gets to that point. Chogosaki has one of the nastiest abilities in the series, which is probably why he only gets one serious fight in it. He can redirect any damage that's inflicted onto him onto literally anything else. Humans, objects, anything. The speed and power of which he's hit with, even if he doesn't see it, or it can be enough to kill him in one hit, can be redirected. It doesn't even need to be physical, even mental damage can be moved. The only option he has is Soryu. He doesn't have a single way to beat him otherwise. Pressure points, Nanto, MT, none of them would matter against Chogo as he'd just shift all the damage back onto Ken. Not much to expand upon with this. It'd just be a straight blowout. Shibushi is next, and this fight would be very one-sided from one or the other, and doesn't really have a definite answer. Shibushi's ability is to open old wounds. If done to humans, she can open up any wounds done to them over the course of their life, or all of the wounds done to them over the course of their life if she wants to. If done to an object, she can make it rust and fall apart. If she manages to touch you, she can make you experience all of your trauma at the same time. But then, she's also shown no durability feats at all, which means this fight comes down to one thing. Could Ken endure all the pain that he's taken over the course of his life at once? For MedakaVerse characters, especially at that point of the story, it wasn't horrible for them. But for a character who's fought so many strong opponents and has taken so many horrible and near fatal injuries multiple times, I personally don't think he'd survive it. The moment it cut on, he'd probably be dead. And as I said for Odo, he wouldn't have time to activate MT. The effects are instant. If he survives it, she stands no chance. If he doesn't, he'd be dead. Again, if we took the Goku blows up the earth type argument, where Ken just randomly speed blitzes her at full power, then yeah, obviously he'd win. But it's not in character for him to do that. Kumagawa is probably the most well-known character of this manga. If you knew of it, you've probably seen him, if not heard of him. Kumagawa had two abilities. For a time, he had an ability named Bookmaker that allowed him to bring people down to his level, strength-wise and mentality-wise. Think of this as the poor man's Soryu. He'd have to hit you to activate it. Base Ken would easily beat him here, but this wasn't his main power. His main ability is all fiction, and the ability is very simple. He controls fiction. He doesn't need to touch you or have any preset requirements. If for some reason he wanted to engage, he could attack you with giant screws, but this sort of power is just the be-all end-all, which is why he's the third most powerful character in the series. For example, he fought Fude, the art guy that I mentioned earlier, and to counter him, he simply erased color from the universe to make his power invalid. This is the type of power Kumagawa has. Only 3 reality warpers can trump it. Chogo, partially, Hajime, and someone we'll get to at the end of this video. Ken's only hope against him would be Soryu, and that comes down if you want to believe that Soryu would overwrite Kumagawa's ability, which given only 3 characters could overwrite it, and one of which was a literal god, I personally doubt it. In character, I don't imagine Ken even getting to use Soryu in time before Kumagawa says something vague like your abilities don't work and then he loses. But before MedakaVerse fans find this video and hop out their seat at the same time, he probably wouldn't kill or try to knock out Ken, and just toy with him instead, bringing up morals or something similar. Kinda like how he does when he goes against Medaka and manages to get rid of her abilities. And similar to that fight, he probably let Ken beat him after that conversation. So yeah, Kumagawa beats Ken in every way power-wise, but due to the type of person Kumagawa is, I can't imagine him winning. Bringing it back down a little bit, we go to Yuzuru. Yuzuri's ability is more of a basic anime power. She can clone herself. She can clone herself up to 640,000 times. And as she's directly pointed out, this isn't like other anime versions of similar moves. If you manage to hit the original, this fight doesn't end and all the clones would be unaffected. Alongside all of that, she's also a combat expert, and is able to, similar to Kamane as we mentioned earlier, earlier, anticipate attacks and counter-react. Although it's not to the same extent as him. She just knows how to counter people well. Now the fact that one Yuzuru could hurt Medaka, 640,000 of them should have destroyed her. But in that case, it seemed like the writer wanted a cool feat to happen. So Medaka defeats all of them off screen. While I believe Ken could beat them, obviously, 640,000 people is a lot of people to fight at the same time. Let alone they'd all be combat experts. And since they don't disappear after the original's dealt with, I see this more as a problem of Ken getting worn down over time. As I'm sure literally any anime protag would be after fighting so many characters at the same time. But once Ken decides to enter MT, this fight ends. It would be a very tedious fight for sure, but he could definitely deal with all of them. And Soryu may negate the ability outright, deleting all the clones and leaving just her. And while she's good in hand-to-hand combat, she's nowhere near Ken's level, so she'd probably get defeated pretty easily. Kotobuki is another character who has just one ability. Just the ability happens to be very strong. Her power is anyone who hears her sing will begin to de-age. And if you hear her sing for long enough, she can turn you into a baby. A majority of this fight hinges on if you believe Ken would figure out how her power works. Similar to Fude, you can't just plop them down in front of each other. She has no abilities other than that, and Ken would obviously be able to incapacitate her before he even de-ages. So for the argument, I'd like to put it in the same context it was in the manga when she fought Medaka, where they're both in a building on the first floor, and she's hiding nearby and Ken's after her. In this scenario, it comes down to how fast Ken could locate her, and if he'd recognize how to counter her. You can argue, if Medaka could figure it out, you think Ken couldn't? But Medaka met and fought quite a few sound-based characters before. Ken hasn't. I don't doubt that he could block his hearing, but would he even understand what's happening? Then there's the other factor. For her power to affect you, you just need to hear her. It could be through a recording or a device. She doesn't physically have to be singing to get you with it. In her fight against Medaka, she got baited into following the singing coming from a phone. If we include that in this fight, it comes down to how you want Ken to react. For me personally, since Ken's fought blind before, I'd imagine he'd be able to sense she's nearby and go after her immediately, clean ignoring the phone distraction. Though not without de-aging a bit. As in the manga, it didn't take long for her characters to become younger. Though, unlike them, Ken is a fair bit older than them, so he has much more time to burn. Kotobuki would most likely be surprised like this and immediately pull out her gun. Yes, in the manga her plan was to turn Medaka into a baby and then just shoot her, but we aren't going to talk about that. As we've seen Ken fight as young as what seems to be like 11, I don't doubt as long as he's above that age he'd be able to defeat her. It's a weird fight to discuss, and honestly you could change the scenario and find a case for her to win, but for most situations, I imagine it goes similar to what I've described, with Ken defeating her before he de-ages too far. Hiko is the anime villain and strongest character in this verse. Unlike the others, he doesn't have any super special abilities. He hits hard and has insane durability. You may think this sounds like a straight wash with Ken dumpstering him, but that's until you realize he straight guttered every other character I said could beat Ken on this list. He knocked out Kumagawa, killed Ajime with a damn rubber band, and tanked an end manga Kurakami Phantom so easily he didn't even flinch and it caused her heart to stop. You see, Hiko is immune to reality manipulation entirely, meaning MT and Soryu wouldn't really work on him. He also does what's known as real damage. I swear to God I didn't make that term up, but it's fairly simple to explain. When he hits you, it can't be negated. You can't heal from it unless he's dead, and you can't tank it with any ability. He hits you, and it hurts. While his strength level is unknown, it took him one hit to incapacitate most of the cast, and he was toying with Medaka and near killed her a few times. As for his durability, it's insanely high, and no attack has worked on him twice, as after the first time, his body won't even recognize it as an attack being done to him, which is how he tanked the Kurakami Phantom. You can argue Ken could kill him in one move, but I honestly doubt it. If Ajime couldn't kill him, I don't think any of Ken's techniques would work. The only thing that's been shown strong enough to injure him was himself, and that was only after he possessed a way smaller body. And even in that body, he managed to stop Medaka with one finger and stomp her out. Long story short, I don't think Ken wins this matchup. This character feels like the kind of antagonist your friend would make to fuck with you and beat whatever your character does. You may be thinking, how did the MedakaVerse characters beat him then? Since you want to throw this stupid ass character in the discussion. The power of friendship. I'm not messing with you. He literally lost to a friendship speech. Meaning if this was SNK, Kazumi probably would have won. Anyways, that's been my Ken versus the MedakaVerse video. I know it's an extremely random manga to choose, but it was fun to imagine how some of these fights would go, and to think about how some of these characters from a manga I read as a child would go up against one of my favorites now. As always, as long as it's respectful, I'm glad to discuss with you guys, because I'm sure there will be some conversation about this video. And I've been M, and I am out.